You just heard Brendan tell you about it. It is an overcast sky, a little bit misty here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway on this, officially the first day of practice for the 109th running of the Indianapolis 500-mile race. Tony Kanaan is scheduled to undergo a refresher course out on the oval today. Kind of funny to think that somebody like Tony Kanaan would need to reacclimate, but I do think it is important to just kind of make sure that that timing is down. That, of course, is the situation only if, as Brendan just told you, Kyle Larson would need a substitute driver on race day. So they would make sure that Kanaan is up to speed, pardon the pun. But the big story of the day, the dominant story in Indianapolis, the one that right now has all the headlines, is that of the Pacers now a win away, and it could come tonight to punching their ticket into the Eastern Conference Finals, taking on the New York Knicks or the Boston Celtics. And it certainly looks like, if you look at, and it kind of, you know what bothers me? Not bothers me, I guess, but just I have to roll my eyes. At the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, right next to Victory Lane, they have, of course, all of the flags set up. A yellow flag meaning caution, black flag meaning the race is, for a particular driver, you need to come in. A red flag, the race is stopped. Checkered flag, the race is won. There is a flag that indicates that you are to allow a slower car or a slower car needs to allow a competing car to get past them. And that is a blue flag with kind of an orange stripe through it. I have to sit here and stare at basically the colors of the New York Knicks for the next 3 hours. And it's entirely possible that if you are a fan of the Pacers and you are going to games and you are going to be at the Eastern Conference Finals, at this point, and there's a lot of basketball yet to be played, but it appears as though Pacers-Knicks are again going to be on the menu if it's Pacers and Racers coming up here in a couple of weeks. But there is still basketball to be played with the Cleveland Cavaliers, and that is the knockout punch is always, always the hardest to land. And I think there are some things that are curious with this particular matchup tonight. For example, the health of Donovan Mitchell. That's obviously the biggest question mark. And is he going to go tonight? As I understand it, and Eddie, you tell me if you have seen anything more developed than this, but my latest understanding is that Donovan Mitchell, the leading scorer of the Cavs and clearly the heart of their offense, that he is still listed as questionable with an ankle injury that was a re-aggravation in game number 4 of an already existing injury. Now, is there anything more on Donovan Mitchell that you can update us at this time, or is it pretty much status quo in that regard?
Status quo in that regard, but Rick Carlisle this morning with the morning show indicated that he's fully expecting Mitchell to be out there tonight for Cleveland. So my guess is that he'll be out there knowing that their season is on the line.
So this is the other thing that comes into play with that I think is interesting. Two things. Number one, would Donovan Mitchell have been on the court, and this is not in any way, shape, or form to question the heart or the desire of Donovan Mitchell. I watched when he came out. Matter of fact, the guy sitting in front of me noticed it even before I did. And they're like, but when Mitchell came out for the second half, he was definitely labored in the way he was moving. And he looked distraught, truth be told. Darius Garland and I think it might have been Mobley came over to him to inquire, as to what was going on. And I'm 99% certain what he said was, I can't go. And they then facilitated for him to go back to the locker room, and he never came back out. Now, would that have been the case if it was an 8-point game? Would that have been the case if it was a tie game or if it was within striking distance? When you're down 41 at the half, your flexibility on what you're willing to do to come back, it is altered, obviously. That goes without saying. But he doesn't come back and now is questionable for this game. Does that mean I'm with Rick Carlisle. I think you have to anticipate. Clearly, you've got a plan for seeing the best of Cleveland. And the Cavs know exactly where things stand for them. Which leads to the other point. I had this conversation last night. As a matter of fact, talked to a couple of people that have played, at the highest level. Not that are part of the Cavs team, but I mean, just know and understand the psyche of a professional athlete. And one of the questions that came up was, is there the possibility? I'm not saying the probability, but is there the possibility that the Cleveland Cavaliers, who've won 64 games in the regular season, who were virtually untouched in the first round of the playoffs and came in probably under full expectation that they were going to find their way. You know, Charles Barkley guaranteed in March. The Cavs are going to the NBA Finals. I mean, this was a fait accompli. The Cavs are a finals team. They're going to the finals. And they are very, very good. Donovan Mitchell's an outstanding player. Darius Garland is a quick-step, ball-handling freak that can pull from anywhere. Evan Mobley is an elite-level defender and also an underappreciated offensive player. Jarrett Allen underneath the basket is virtually automatic, and you have to like his quiet presence. And then they've got shooters. So they're very, very good. And it is all of the accolades their way are noted and well-deserved. And for that, even though I think that it is still a team that, you know, sometimes you get veteran teams that are like, yeah, I've been here, done this. Let's go. You know, I'm ready to go to the Bahamas. I don't think that that's Cleveland's mentality. But I was talking last night with someone who brought this up, and they said, you know, the person I was talking to, I've been on several teams that played in the playoffs. And one of the things that you just never know from one team to the next, if it's a close game, late third, early fourth quarter, they look up at the scoreboard and they're like, you know, it's a 4-point game. We're down 4. If we win this game, we got to go back. We got to get on a plane. We got to go back. We got to go on the road. And we just got beat by, you know, we were down 40 at one point. Is there a psychological aspect that goes into that where then they just say, let's just end it, man? You know, we fell short. Now, I'm not saying that Cleveland's going to do that, and I'm not saying that that's – I have no reason to believe this Cleveland Cavaliers team is made up for that from a psychological standpoint. What I'm saying is I do think there are players, I know for a fact, there are players that have played in the NBA that will tell you that mindset does come into play for professional basketball teams from time to time. And whether or not that is something that's going to come into play for the Cavs, we don't know. We're going to find out. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think it's going to be a really, really challenging game for the Pacers tonight. And can they go in there and win? Clearly, they have, right? But Cleveland knows their back's against the wall. And we'll talk plenty about it over the course of today. I'll tell you another storyline that happened on my way in. It happened earlier this morning. But I'm on my way in. I get a phone call. And Paul Corsaro is a guy that we have gotten to know on this show. I don't know him. It would be disingenuous to say that I know him well. I know that, you know, Jimmy knows him well. Eddie, I think you probably have worked with or crossed paths with him over the course of your career, clearly being a guy that went to UND. But Paul Corsaro is, you know, obviously just got done with his first year as the head basketball coach at IUND. And he took over a program that was really trying to start from scratch. And it seemed like the perfect fit for him to go from UND to IUND. And word comes out today that he has been relieved of his duties as the head basketball coach at IUND. And it is, by all account, and also from what I've been told, pretty reliably, after an investigation from claims made, I'm told, up to 4 different players of verbal and physical abuse of players. Now, when I say physical abuse, I mean, you know, you get into a gray area there, I understand. I'm just telling you what is the report is that there was an investigation after a number of players stepped forward simply to say that the treatment that they were undergoing was not consistent with what the athletic department would want to see. And the university issued a statement upon his departure that aligns with that, simply to say that that his coaching methods did not align with the spirit of what the athletic department was hoping for. I'm paraphrasing a bit, but that's essentially what it said. So now, IUND is in a situation where they're looking for a head coach. One of the things that is a real challenge there, and I just had this conversation 2 weeks ago. One of the challenges, I think, for IUND is the NIL aspect of it. Because when you get into, like in the Horizon League, and you look at the teams in that league that have had a lot of success and that have been able to sustain at that level of success, the NIL factor is a big, big part of that. And, you know, IU Indy did not have. They have had fundraisers. They have raised some money. They have a collective. But I think one of the things that's challenging for that school and that department is, number one, you obviously now you're bringing in another new coach, and we'll get to that in a second. But number two, while they do have some collective, I think one of the things that is hard for IU Indy is a lot of their boosters, a lot of their a lot of the alumni for IU Indy, formerly IUPUI, they are first and foremost, and I hate to say it this way, but it's a reality, probably IU or Purdue fans. And so the school that they, even though they went through that university and their degree, they graduated from that university, when they think about athletic boosting and certainly check writing, the first thing they think of is the school that is the one that they primarily sit down and watch the games of and follow, and it's probably in Bloomington or West Lafayette. And I think there is an element of a challenge there, quite frankly, in raising that money. But it is my understanding that IU Indy at this point has a list of, basically on one hand, of coaches that they're interested in. I think most of them probably are those that are like an assistant somewhere, maybe even assistants currently on the staff. I think what they need to do is find a coach that has experience at the Division I level in navigating through for a program, whether it be a school out of, say a mid-tier MAC program, or a program maybe even like, somebody who has been through the Horizon, or one of the, the Ohio Valley, one of the leagues where NIL is a reality, but at the same time a challenging reality. Because what you need is somebody that can come in that has the experience of being that fundraising CEO and working that aspect of building a roster and building a program, knowing that you are going to mix between kids that are wanting NIL money because that's what, to keep up with the Joneses, or kids that are going to utilize your program for a year or two as a launch board to then go to a place that's going to pay them more. You look, for example, at, Nebraska just paid, I think, a center like $600,000 that was making $20,000 in, say, the MAC. I think it was the MAC. And those things are a challenge, right? And that's one of the things that IU Indy is going to have to look towards. But, we can discuss that over the course of today as well. Again, at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, everything is silent right now. Will not be that way, hopefully, this afternoon because of the fact that there's going to be open practice today. And in addition, Tony Kanaan still has to undergo his veteran refresher course. But right now, Mother Nature's not cooperating. The dryers were out on the track. It's not raining here. It's just kind of a stubborn mist would be the best way to say it. So back to the Knicks and the Celtics and who the Pacers would presumably face next if they are able to win tonight or then close things out in Game 6 on Thursday. So, Eddie, I will ask you this. If the Pacers tonight, let's just say hypothetically that Cleveland does win tonight and they get their first win at home in this playoff series, and it comes back to Indianapolis for game number 6. How much pressure do you think is on the Pacers at that point? And can Indiana then, if they were to not win game 6, are you confident they would go in and win a game 7 in Cleveland?
I'm almost very confident in their ability to close it out at home in game number 6, just because we have seen them respond every time for the last month and a half, 2 months, every time they've lost with a win. I think there would be a little added pressure on Thursday if there was a game 6, knowing that if you lose this game, then you have to go back to Cleveland for a game 7 on Sunday. And in terms of your question about my confidence level of Indiana going to Cleveland and winning, I think it would probably be 50-50, just because at that point you're probably figuring that Darius Garland is going to be a little bit healthier, not a whole lot, but a little bit healthier. Mitchell should be a little bit healthier. The same for Mobley. And that arena at Rocket, I think it's Rocket Arena now. Yeah, Rocket Arena will be absolutely electric, and it's going to be really, really loud. And so it'll be a tough environment for the Pacers. But I find it very, very hard to believe that they're going to lose 3 consecutive games to Cleveland.
Okay, right now, the adjusted NBA champion and NBA conference champion odds. The odds-on favorite now to win the NBA title, the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Oklahoma City Thunder are now listed as the favorite to win the NBA title. Eddie Garrison, would you like to guess who is listed as the second best odds, the second favorite, if you will, to win the NBA title?
I would
without
assume
looking?
it would be the New York Knicks.
Correct. The New York Knicks are second. Third.
The Minnesota Timberwolves?
That is correct. You're showing your degenerate gambler's ability here. All right, fourth.
The Denver Nuggets?
Incorrect.
Oh, then it's Pacers, then Nuggets?
Incorrect again.
Oh,
it is the Pacers.
Okay.
Pacers, and then Cleveland, followed by Denver,
yeah.
Boston, and Golden State. The Pacers right now are at plus 900. Cleveland is at 10-1, Denver at 15-1, Boston at 25-1. So let's talk about Boston yesterday or last night. It would appear they're done because Jason Tatum, with that injury that absolutely looked like, and it's weird how all of us now in the world of sports have become, you can just tell. I'm not saying this is the case. I'm not a doctor. But it certainly looked like, and instantly everyone on social media and in the world is saying, that looks like an Achilles injury. And it certainly looked like exactly that Jason Tatum had an injury that you could, I hate to say it, you could just tell. It looked like Damian Lillard in the fact that as soon as he went down, you could tell where he was favoring it, the way that he was moving or not able to move, that it would be an Achilles. And if that's the case, then Jason Tatum is going to be, probably out for next year as well. And don't look now. This is interesting, and I think it has impact on the Pacers in a number of ways. Number one, it changes the complexion of the Eastern Conference race because, yes, I understand that New York was already leading in that series. But with Boston, when you've got Tatum and you've got Brown, you never totally are ruling them out, right? And so that's number one. Number two, then you look to next year. And if you look at the Pacers and their thought process and what the Pacers are looking at in their immediacy, then what you were looking at is a team and a franchise that and we knew going into the year. And it was interesting that the Pacers kind of staved this off, and I'm talking about the negotiating table with Miles Turner. And, the Pacers essentially at the beginning of the season said, we're going to play through the year, and then we will start to deal with that, once Turner is entering into free agency. And Turner seemed okay with that. And it would have been totally understandable, probably even justified, if there would have been an assumption that meant that they had come to some sort of a negotiating standstill. It wasn't the case. Miles Turner, and you got to give Miles Turner all the credit in the world on this. All the credit in the world. There's a long list of players that going into a contract year, if they didn't get met with what that franchise wanted, or excuse me, if they didn't get met with what they expected for the franchise and the franchise wasn't giving them what they wanted, they feel slighted by it, they sulk, and then they just kind of not fade away, but their game goes away and they settle and they go somewhere else and they check out well before they go back to the negotiating table. And it's a challenging thing, and I think you've got to be a very mature player, a very mature person and a very mature player to say, you know what, I'm going to still go in and I'm going to prove my worth. Miles Turner, you could make the argument, is certainly in the last 3 months playing the best basketball he's played as a Pacer. His game has had to undergo different definitions. At times he was, I think there were people that thought, I'm not saying Miles Turner was one, I'm not saying the Pacers brass thought this, but there was a thought process at one time that when Paul George left, that Miles Turner was, this is the new face, and he's going to be like a stretch 3 guy or a stretch 4 guy, more like a stretch 4 guy. Obviously, I think most people knew that he didn't have the lateral quickness for that per se, but they had to kind of define. Then it was, no, he is strictly a rim protector. Then it was, well, he's a rim protector and a shooter. And now what he is a centerpiece of what they do. I've talked about the fact that he's kind of the funnel ball for them at the top of the key, especially when they're in a zone or when they need to just reset and kind of recycle, if you will, a possession. It goes into him, and he facilitates or finds out where it needs to go. But in addition to that, he clearly, as you saw in the other night at Gainbridge Fieldhouse on Sunday night, when he gets going from the three-point line, it jumpstarts everything, and he is a lightning in a bottle guy. the way that this team is built, yes, I know that Tyrese Halliburton is the all-star. I know that Pascal Siakam is the veteran champion. But the way this team is built, and each piece of the center Lego of the entire chemistry here is Miles Turner. And the way that he plays defensively, and the way that he trails offensively, and the way that he can shoot and reset offensively, everything is centered around Turner. And there is no question now, as the Pacers have gotten themselves on the brink of the Eastern Conference Finals, as the Pacers have gotten themselves even within contention of getting to the NBA Finals, then you look at it and you go, the window's now. 3 years ago or whatever it was, when they, at the beginning of the year, when they basically got all the media assembled together and said, look, we need you guys and gals to do us a huge favor here. And please, please understand that we have to be patient and that we are building this thing from scratch. This kid Halliburton that we got from the Kings, we think he's a good player. And we really like what we've seen out of this Andrew Nembhard that we got as kind of a steal draft pick. And we really like him. And we think that they're going to be good players for us. But we need you to understand that it's going to be a long process. And please work with us on that. And when they were saying those things, I don't think even the Pacers knew that it was going to come this quickly and this with this level of strength. So here we are. You obviously have from a year ago the footprint. And yes, you could say, well, Lillard was hurt and Cleveland was hurt. But now here they are, and they are right back in the situation. They're right on the doorstep of it. And the window is theoretically going to be open for a while, except for this, the big question mark. And that is that question mark of, are they going to re-sign Miles Turner? Are they going to retain Miles Turner? Are they going to commit beyond this year to Miles Turner? The answer, without question, certainly from Miles Turner's standpoint, the answer is I hope so, right? When he wrote that piece in, talking about his love for Indiana, that was a smart play, because not only was he making himself even more beloved by the fan base, but in addition to that, he was kind of checkmating the Pacers brass, because once he wrote that, it's like, okay, clearly he wants to be here. Clearly he loves these guys. Clearly he sees a special thing happening in Indiana. So now it's up to the Pacers to make sure that continues and he keeps them on board, right? And so the question now becomes, if there was ever any doubt, or the point becomes, if there was ever any doubt about the importance of Miles Turner long-term in Indiana, that doubt to me went away last night when Jason Tatum went down, because it only further opens the window for Indiana in the next year or two. And I'm not hoping that Jason Tatum is out for the year. I'm not. But the reality is, it certainly looked like that was a possibility, that he is going to be out beyond the end of this season. And if that's the case, if Boston's suddenly without Tatum, and if Cleveland, after a 64-win year, and yes, they were a little banged up at the beginning of the series, but if Cleveland now is showing a vulnerability, and you never know what happens to a team like that if they get knocked out, and then all of a sudden, was this their window, or did they come back at the same strength with the same cohesiveness that they have right now? And then you look around, New York's a fabulous team, and I think Karl Anthony Towns is a great player. And Jalen Brunson, you got to love him, right? But Tom Thibodeau's teams, the later in the year that you face New York in a series, the better your advantage, because of the fact that Tom Thibodeau runs his teams into the ground, and they don't play with the level of depth that Indiana does, and so you feel good about your Pacers' chances, the Pacers' chances there. My point simply being, I'm not saying that the Pacers are the favorite moving forward for this year or next, but they have gone from be patient to the time is now, and there's no reason for them to not take where they are right now with this group. And yes, they're going to have to get creative in the money they come up with Miles Turner, probably go into the tax, and then you would think that it makes it more difficult to retain another player moving forward, and that this would be their core piece. And there's one guy that might mean bad news for. I'll tell you who that is, and we'll get you caught up as well on the latest happenings here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway on this day, practice number 1 for the 109th running of the Indy 500, live from IMS Aquarium Company on a Tuesday here on The Fan. Jake Query back at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Eddie Garrison back in the DriveHubler.com studios as we roll along on a misty Tuesday. You feel bad because they have out here a lot of elementary school kids that are here for a field trip that so far have not been able to see a car on the track. That's disappointing for the kids. The upshot for me when the elementary school kids are coming around is that every once in a while one of them strays wayward, comes in and joins me. Derek Schultz is here with us wearing brand new shoes, I noticed. Those are nifty.
Yeah, thank you. I have a beard, so clearly I'm not an elementary school kid. You do know that, right?
Uh-huh.
How
sure.
cool would that be, though? Did you get to do that at Eastwood or any of the places that you were at?
No. I don't know when that came about where, just the overall – I think it's usually fourth-grade kids, but I do not recall doing that. Of course, I was out here a lot just in general, right? But I don't recall in those days that being the case, but it would be pretty cool.
Well,
right?
those are the days when the month of May was literally the month of May.
Correct.
Which is weird to think that we're now – what are we? We're 15-something years past that now. We've had this condensed schedule now for a long time. It's hard to even think of those old days.
Back in I'll tell you, one of the things, Derek, obviously nostalgically speaking, that I think a lot of people think about with the track is Pacers and Racers, and that means Pacers and Knicks more often than not. And it's hard to believe, but for the second straight year, and obviously it's been a while since it's been the case for the Eastern Conference Finals, but for the second straight year, we may see Pacers and Knicks in the playoffs. For me, that seems far more sure that New York is going to be there than the Pacers. I think the Pacers still have work. You don't want to put in the cart before the horse here. It looks very good for them, but you just don't know. But your thoughts on tonight?
Yeah, post-Tatum injury, I think you would say that. I don't think you would have said that if Tatum was still healthy. But the problem for the Knicks and the Pacers is that they're only guaranteed one more home game. So, if you lose Game 5, suddenly that becomes far more of a 50-50 proposition than kind of where it is now. I think the Pacers have every chance in the world to go into Cleveland and put down their season right at this moment. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if Cleveland bounced back. And they won 64 games this year, Jake. 64
games.
I
know.
I know they're the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? And outside of LeBron, when you think of the Cavs, you kind of think of them as, okay, Brad Daugherty, like Craig Elo, like Mark Price, who cares? Like, they're not a team that has ever really won anything outside of that one ring with LeBron. And so I don't think people appreciated just how good they were. They had 2 different winning streaks of 15 games in a row. You think they can't win 3 straight? Now, a lot of that is dependent on Donovan Mitchell's health, and they're going to need to get more from their supporting cast. Ty Jerome has been awful in the series, like borderline unplayable. But I think Cleveland is very talented. They're very deep, and I would just be hesitant. Look, the Pacers are in a fantastic spot. We all know the history. Teams up 3-1 have won 95% of the time, so the math is on the Pacers' side. But I'm still a little bit hesitant for both the Pacers and the Knicks to just start calling it right now.
Okay, but here's the thing, Derek. This is what I was just talking about. The Pacers now, because the window is open for them. This is their time. This particular group. And I think the best thing about this group is, and this is assuming that they are able to retain Miles Turner. And I don't see any reason why they don't re-sign Miles Turner. But in order to re-sign Miles Turner, they're going to have to get creative, financially speaking, beyond this year. And to do that, that means that you probably are going to have to select somebody that you don't re-sign, whether that be Isaiah Jackson or the guy that I'm about to mention. And I think he's a very good player. I like that he brings a little bit of nastiness to him that every team needs. But to me, the more that we move along here, the more it feels like Benedict Matherin is going to become the odd man out. Tell me why I'm wrong.
No, I don't think you're wrong. And I take every opportunity to tell you why I think you're wrong when I think you're wrong. I don't think you're wrong.
You know what? You were able to do that once in 2013, right?
Yeah.
You're on a 12-year streak where you've not been able to actually pull that card.
Took advantage of that one time that happened. I agree with you. He just seems like he is a odd fit, and that's probably the nicest way to put it, whereas all of the other Pacers ancillary pieces fit in seamlessly. Like Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith, and even though it's hard to even call those guys ancillary pieces with how good they've been in these playoffs so far, especially Nesmith. Obi Toppin, players like that. Like, I never feel like I'm emerging out of a game thinking to myself, oh, God, Obi again? Or, man, I can't believe Nembhard did that. Whereas with Matherin, it's just, what are we even doing? Why even create that incident? We can sit here all we want and talk about, was it a close fist? Was it not a close fist? Did he deserve the ejection? I didn't think he deserved an ejection. I thought it was a tech him and move on type thing, but he got an ejection, and thankfully that ended up being a footnote, but that could have very easily been a bit of a rallying cry for Cleveland to come. They were only down 11, 12 points at that point.
Right. To
come back in that game, and so he really put his teammates in a precarious position. And you just don't want somebody that's going to do that. I think all the world of his talent. And I'm very interested to see if he can truly hit the upside that we thought that he could hit coming out of Arizona. But I'm just not 100% convinced.
I just think
convinced it's going to be here.
Here's the thing. I think he has very unique – Ben Matherin. I think he has very good skills. I think there's a lot that he brings to the table. I just don't know that those things right now are what this particular group is in need of. That's
Fair.
the thing. Like, you know what I mean? He is a very good scorer, but and there are times. This is the thing. Ben Matherin is a very good scorer, but he is a very good scorer in a style that doesn't necessarily match the style that Indiana wants to play at their best. And he is an isolated. I'm going to put my nose down. It's like you've always accused me of. You know what I mean? Outstanding. I mean, you tell me all the time, outstanding at what I do, but don't necessarily need, like, the secondary running mate. You know what I mean?
Here's how I'll put it. Matherin is good at getting his. I don't know if the team always feeds off of
That's
him
what I
getting
mean,
his.
yes.
Even when he's filling it up, I don't know if that always kind of changes the dynamic for the team. I think if the Pacers, in Matherin's defense, if the Pacers had a weaker bench, then I think Matherin would be more important.
Totally agree.
But the bench is pretty good as it is,
right.
even if you take
Matherin
out.
The point being
this,
Derek, the point being that when you bring in the Pacers second unit, you can still play the same style that you're playing with the first unit. And so you don't need, we're getting our group that runs the floor, we're bringing them out, so now we need somebody who is the designated scorer. That second unit can play when you've got and yes, McConnell is probably somebody that's getting up there in age, but when you have McConnell out there with Toppin, who can do a lot of different things offensively. Shepard, if he's open, can knock down a shot. Walker is starting to develop into a guy that can shoot from the outside. But they do that with that ball movement, and that ball movement comes to a standstill when it goes to Matherin. That's the real challenge there. By the way, so you and I, a week from Friday, you're going to be out here, right? Is that right?
Yes.
Carb Day, right?
Carb Day is as it's called, yes. Fairly famous.
You're wearing a Carb Day lanyard already. What's going on there?
This is the one that they just gave me.
It says Carb Day on the back. Oh, okay.
This is the one they gave me at IMS Media Center. I don't have a hard card like you do.
Okay.
So I don't get into all the IndyCar races. I only get into this one.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
And you have roles and responsibilities out here above and beyond having fun on Carb Day, right?
Yeah, so we're just working from here all week long. We've got a bunch of engineers, Purdue engineers in the garages. We have a graduate from either the motorsports engineering program or the mechanical engineering programs in Indianapolis, or the mechanical engineering program in West Lafayette, which obviously a lot of people know about too, on every American-based IndyCar team. We tried to do a count of this a couple of weeks ago. Like, I contacted every single IndyCar team, and thank you for your help. Arnie, as well, from IndyCar, helped me out with that. And we were unable to determine how many. It was north of 50. There are 12 Indianapolis graduates alone with Ganassi, which is obviously cruising right now thanks to Alex Palou, and has won 6 Indy 500s. But it's kind of a cool story. When people think of making the Indianapolis 500, I think they think of the drivers, right? They think, and obviously Alex Palou is not a Purdue graduate, neither is Alexander Rossi, but the guys powering those cars largely are the guys and gals. We have some female rock stars as well that are on some of these teams. So telling those stories and getting media opportunities and just having an excuse to work out here for the next 2 weeks.
Now,
that's
most importantly for Carb Day, your tradition for years has been, and I'm holding you to it, since I had to pull the strings to get you back on the air for the day on Carb Day, you're going to rock that mid-70s porn stash, right?
I can't do it unless I can do it right. And when I do the mustache, thank you for the compliment, if that was a compliment.
That's
what I'm going to take it as.
Not at all, no.
In order to grow it in full bloom, if you will, I usually stop shaving April 1st. So when you see the mustache that I've had out here where it's just the mustache, that's 6-7 weeks of body hair growth protruding out of there. Yeah.
Okay.
Protruding. The problem is
It's
I'm getting a
foul.
lot of gray and white,
Right,
and it
that's
looks
right.
like I've got like tuna salad
Yes.
in there.
Yeah. It's not a
Sometimes
good
there's
look.
actual tuna salad in there, in fact. But
Okay.
in this case, it's just part of
That's
me
good.
getting old.
All right. Well, we'll hopefully see some cars out on the track, but we'll get back into the Pacers conversation. Stephen Holder joining us 1 o'clock today. Scott Agnes at 2. And a guy that has a new paint scheme for the 109th running of the Indy 500, and I'm guessing is probably going to be watching the Pacer game tonight as well. Conor Daly joins us 2 o'clock hour as we roll along here. Tuesday edition, Query and Company on the Fan. At the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, Jake Query, Eddie Garrison back in our DriveHubler.com studios on this Tuesday of Query and Company. Stephen Holder coming up top of the hour. Pacers Cavs tonight. It is game number 5 and a chance for the Pacers to close things out and move along. There's a danger probably in looking too far down the horizon because of the fact, and it becomes tantalizing when you really look at the fact that they have obviously one win left against Cleveland to move on, and then theoretically will be taking on New York. Now, there's obviously a lot in play with that, but the Knicks and the Celtics, with Jason Tatum out now, it feels like a foregone conclusion that the Knicks would advance. If you really think about it, and it's amazing to think about, because I don't know that anybody, over the course of the year, especially if you look back at the beginning of the season, when you had, at the beginning of the year, the situation with the injuries to Nembhard and Nesmith and the slow start they got off to, I don't know that anybody thought, sure, they thought, what's going on? Was it really last year just the injuries from other teams that allowed, was it attrition that put Indiana into the situation that they were in? And now here you are, and then you look at the teams that are hanging around. Oklahoma City is outstanding, no question about it. But outside of that, does anybody overly worry you? I mean, Denver is a challenge because of Jokic, but they're on the ropes. Golden State, who's aging, obviously, and then, like I said, New York, Cleveland, it's incredible. I mean, to think that here they are, and yes, they are going to obviously be one of, if they were to win tonight, big if. I mean, we're talking a big ask there, okay? But if they were to win tonight, then they go into a situation where there's only 4 teams left, and you feel pretty good about any of the 4 teams that they could win a series. But there's a danger in that because you have a game left to play, and you've got to do it against a team that has been as good as anybody in the NBA this year. Cleveland has had multiple double-digit win streaks this year. Now, has this Cleveland team, are they battle-tested in what it's going to take tonight to come out when everybody's waiting to see what's going to happen, and they know that if they lose late in the game tonight, and this is what's the most critical thing for the Pacers. The Pacers absolutely, unequivocally, without doubt and without question, need to come out and immediately set a tone. Because if they get down, it's going to be tough to come back because Cleveland is not going to let up, one would think. Except for this. Does Cleveland think about, and does it weigh in their minds? And the answer probably is no. But does it weigh in the minds of the Cleveland Cavaliers? Man, that place was so loud on Sunday. That place was so raucous on Sunday. Those guys hit shots from everywhere. We were down 40. We got doubled up at one point. And we got to go back and try to go through all of that again just to extend it. And if we go there and win, we got to come back, and then we got to go through this all again. We got to get on a plane and go back there and do that. And, I mean, the injuries stacked up a little bit. We gave it our best college try. Man, I don't know. I mean, does that come into play? It sounds crazy because they're professional athletes and they won 64 games this year, and it's a top-level franchise. But does that come into play? You can't rule it out. The possibility of that, you cannot rule it out. That's why the Pacers need to come out and they need to set a tone immediately and just run them through the ringer tonight and try to psychologically break Cleveland. Because there were points in that game. Now, I will say, Darius Garland didn't look psychologically broken. Late in that game, they're down 35. Garland's on the bench, and, he looked pretty, I mean, he's kind of laid back. I'm not going to say he was laughing about it, but he didn't look overly stressed about it. Mitchell, I do truly believe that injury was a factor in why he was not back out there. Would he have been back out there if they were down 5? Maybe. And, Mobley, I mean, it's hard to tell with Mobley because more often than not, he looks like he's literally an aspirin away from a coma. I mean, the guy doesn't have a lot of emotion in general. Great player. So it's kind of hard to tell what his disposition is. And then Jared Allen's kind of the same way, just kind of a straightforward dude. But you got to wonder if they psychologically what that meant to them. I mean, a number one seed, you don't see number one seeds go on the road and get down 40. They were humiliated. They were totally humiliated. And so what becomes their mantra, their mindset tonight? One of the things that we're definitely going to watch for. What we're watching for here at the Speedway, by the way, hopefully, is cars getting out onto the track. Now, just to give you a recap of what the schedule was supposed to be today, the veteran, a special veteran refresher course for Tony Kanaan. Tony Kanaan's a principal now for Arrow McLaren, and he's not scheduled to run the Indy 500. I understand, but Kyle Larson is scheduled to attempt to qualify and run the Indy 500 for McLaren, and he is also tentatively scheduled to run in the NASCAR Coca-Cola 600 that night. And so in attempt to do the double, if, for example, on race day the conditions are like this and the race gets pushed back like it did a year ago, he will not do what he did last year. He will go to Charlotte, and at that point, Tony Kanaan will strap into the car in the place of Kyle Larson. And in that event, he has to make sure that he has undergone the mandatory veteran refresher course. That is scheduled, that course, to take place for Tony Kanaan today. But we're also getting into the window of the point where the next thing on the schedule will be what we call the all-skate, all of the cars. Every car that is entered, every driver that is entered will have the opportunity to practice here at IMS this afternoon. And right now, the only thing going around the track are the safety trucks that are doing so to try to dry the track, because there has not been a downpour, but there's been a very persistent and consistent mist. Dare I say, an annoying one here. We'll get you caught up to speed. Pardon the pun on everything going on. Stephen Holder joining us just about 6 minutes from now. 1 o'clock hour underway. Jake Query at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. You just heard Brendan lay out for you the reality of why things are quiet right now, other than the occasional updates of Brendan King, which can be heard in Claremont when he does them. Of course, I can't say much. I probably speak loudly myself. Also, the big story of the day coming in, aside from the Pacers, is the fact that Paul Casaro is out as the head basketball coach at IU Indy after just one season. After a successful 4-year stint at the University of Indianapolis, the Roncalli native was hired in to IU Indy, did a pretty good job with a roster that had challenges, obviously. But after a number of players transferred, at least 4 players, and apparently the families of 6 total players, made a report to IU Indy of their displeasure at the way that Casaro, his coaching methods. IU Indy did an investigation and decided to move on from the coach after 1 year. So as a result, the Jags are now looking for a new head basketball coach. My understanding is they already have a list of 4 individuals, I think primarily from the assistant ranks. We can get into that at another time, just in terms of the challenges of that. Not challenges of the program, comes off the wrong way, but the things that those individuals will face if they were to be the ones selected to lead that program. Joining us now on the guest line, and I'm not sure how much this individual has been to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I feel like I need to bring him around here and do a full tutorial and tour of the grounds at IMS. Stephen Holder of ESPN.com joining us on the show. Stephen, you have spent how much time within the 2.5-mile oval of IMS?
Not a ton, but I have done enough to kind of appreciate and understand, I think. In fact, it was more so when I first got here. I may have told this story before, but the short version is in the spring of 2014, that was my first race season here in Indianapolis. And I filled in, at the time, Bob Kravitz and I were both at the Indy Star, and the Pacers were making their run at the time, right? Paul George and company. And so Bob handled the Pacers, and they said, hey, it's the Colts off season, so we're going to have you kind of handle the race commentary part of it, as a columnist for May. Do you think you can handle it? And I said, well, not really, but I'll try. So,
right. Which is, by the way, here's the thing, Stephen. Let's go back to this real quick. Not to cut you off there, which I did, but
yeah.
I tell young people a lot in the industry. Really, this is probably applicable in any industry, but we all are given at times opportunity that we personally know maybe we're not ready for, but that baptism by fire, I think, is an important part of. And I'm not saying that you lie and fabricate that kind of thing, but
no,
but that baptism
100%.
by fire is an important part of the steps of what we do.
Oh, 100%. And not that your listeners want a journalism lesson, but just whatever. So we're on the rabbit hole now. So I tell young aspiring sports writers and broadcasters all the time. They always say, yeah, I just have such a passion for sports. I love sports. I'm like, okay, I don't care. I literally tell them this. I don't care if you like sports, because that won't make you a good reporter. Like, I really don't care. It matters. It helps for sure, right? But, are you a good journalist? That has nothing to do with whether you love sports. You can love sports and not be a good journalist, right? So the two things are not necessarily, they don't necessarily go hand in hand. So, and I say, if you're a good journalist, you can cover anything. If they dropped me off at Wall Street tomorrow and said, from now on, you're covering economics or you're covering finance, I don't know anything about that world, but that you have instincts and you have this thirst for information and finding things out, and so you learn how to ask questions. And so basically being really stupid, it helps. So I was very stupid in my first race season.
I've told this story as well. When I was probably in late high school, early college era, Ed Sorensen was the guy that I, kind of cut my teeth under, and that, and so Ed was, I said the same thing to Ed. I'm just a huge sports fan. What are your favorite sports? What are your favorite teams? So I tell him, and he said, what sports do you know the least about? And I said, well, I've never really followed hockey because, I live in Indianapolis and we don't have an NHL team, and, tennis and, whatever. So back when the Sporting News was a weekly newspaper, it was awesome, by the way. the next day I came in, and there was a Sporting News sitting on the desk that I used when I loitered in there, and I picked it up, and every sport that I was a fan of had been removed. And he said,
great.
And he said, you need to make a habit of reading that cover to cover each week, only the sections that I included for you. And that was a big lesson for me, right? I mean, so having said that, I'm curious of this, and then we'll get into both the Pacers and the Colts with you. But I am curious of this. As somebody who came to Indianapolis, born and raised in South Florida, and obviously living in Florida and covering Tampa and those things, and then you come to Indianapolis. Yeah. Was the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and the race itself, did it seem like a daunting thing to try to grasp and put your hands around? Or once you got here, was it in fact more simple than you thought it was in terms of the coverage and the storylines and everything that goes into it?
Well, it is a little bit complicated because I don't love this word, but maybe race fans don't always appreciate it, but it's a little bit of a niche sport, right? I mean, you know this, right?
Oh, no question. Yeah, no question.
Right? It is. It's not. I mean, racing is, as a concept, everyone understands racing. People have seen, everyone's seen a NASCAR race, I'm sure. Everyone's probably familiar with the Indy 500, right? No matter where you're born and raised. And I had even covered some racing. We had in Miami, for example, we have a NASCAR track. I covered races there. I'm familiar with racing. So it wasn't like a completely new experience. But IndyCar and the Indy 500 are things that people really, really care about here, and you kind of got to know what you're talking about, right? So that was the line I had to walk, and I still remember. I'm still pretty proud of this. I pulled this up actually on my screen as we're talking. May 23rd, 2014. I wrote a column in the Star, basically about, hey, this is my first Indy 500, and I don't know what the hell's going to happen. I have no idea what to expect. So I said I set out on this effort to find out what I should look for in my first Indy 500, and I went around and I asked all the important pillars of the sport. And my first quote in the story is from Bobby Unser, and it goes from there. And so it was one of my favorite columns I've ever written because it was not a very eloquently written thing or anything. It was, hey, I'm a moron. I don't know what I'm doing.
If it includes Bobby Unser, it was eloquent. If it includes Bobby Unser, it was literally, sweetie, let me tell you. The thing about coming to the Speedway, you just don't know what you're going to see. That's exactly what he said to you, right?
We talked for about an hour, okay?
Oh, yeah. You asked one question,
Easily. And I did not talk. He talked for an hour. So,
yes.
Yeah, it was a great experience in retrospect. And that set the tone for my understanding of May in Indiana. So, I know that's not why I came on the show, but I do love telling that story.
Bobby Unser, by the way, listed his phone number was listed in the Albuquerque phone book, and as a matter of fact, I think it was. I mean, I can say it now, but it was listed in the phone book. But the area code and then 500 was in it somehow. It was something 500.
Really?
But somebody told me, they said you should call him. Said this was when I was a much younger guy before I was involved in what I do now, and they said you should call Bobby Unser because he likes to talk about the 500. And I thought, there's no way. But he was the winner of the first race that I attended. And I was like 24 years old, and I called information. Yes, I need a listing, please, for Bob Unser. They give me his phone number. I call him. He answers the phone. And I said, my name is Jake Query, and I'm from Indianapolis, and I just had a question for you about the 81 race because that was first. And he literally said, I'm always willing to talk to a race fan. And I was on the phone with the guy for like an hour and a half. It was the greatest hour and a half of my life, right? Yes, totally. The guy was the absolute. There was nobody like Bobby Unser, man. Absolute legend of Bobby Unser. All right, Stephen.
Real
now,
quick, last thing on this. The first quote in here, I told him it was my first time. He says, "Oh, lad, let me tell you about my first time." He says, when I came here for the first time, this is a direct quote. My experience was probably one that everybody experiences. He says, when I first came to this town, I drove down Georgetown Road. I looked at those grandstands from down on 16th Street, and I could not believe my eyes. My brain could not cope. They go on forever. And I was like, yes, I felt the same thing. So
now,
he was a man.
You know the other Bobby Unser trick. This is the best. When Bobby Unser first came to the track, you know Bobby Unser's rule of thumb, don't you? This is the best, Stephen. Bobby Unser was open about the fact that when he first came to the Speedway in his younger years, He would come to the Speedway. He would go to practice, whatever else. Of course, he was a guy that had come, born and raised in Colorado. He was born in Colorado Springs, but then moved to Albuquerque. Right. His family in Albuquerque, but he was the master at the Pikes Peak. He was a racer that won several of the races on going up and down Pikes Peak. But at any rate, so he comes to Indianapolis, and he's a young driver. He was a good-looking guy, very personable. So they would practice here, and then he would go to a grocery store, and he would get a frozen turkey, put it in his grocery cart, I kid you not, push it around until he saw a woman that he considered attractive and would walk up and say, listen, I'm here racing at Indianapolis, and I just want to make a turkey dinner, but I don't have a stove and an oven in my hotel room. Any chance I could come to your house and make dinner? And that's how he would, meet women when he was in Indianapolis. Legend,
that
right?
Is unbelievable.
Legend.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. I was in a fantasy football league once where the name of one of the teams in my fantasy football league was Bobby Unser's Turkey Dinner. I'm like, hey, that's right. Let's go. All right, Pacers, Cavs tonight. Let's begin with this. I know we're going to talk Colts, but I do want to get your thoughts because you covered the Pacers throughout the playoffs. One of the things that I just threw out, Stephen, you've covered sports. Is this a possibility? I talked yesterday to somebody within NBA circles that said, look, you can't rule out. I'm not saying the probability, but you can't rule out the possibility that Cleveland in a tight game tonight may look at the scoreboard and just say, you know what, we'd have to get on a plane, fly back to the place where we just got beat by 40, and even if we win that, we'd have to come back to Cleveland for a Game 7, and that they could just psychologically check out at that point. Any chance that that's a possibility?
Well, it would be subconscious for sure, but it is a possibility from a subconscious perspective, and here's why. Because I think it goes back to the previous game. I think that game took their heart, and I know it's just one game, and they play a lot of games in the NBA, right? You have a lot of bad nights in the NBA, so psychologically they are probably very equipped to move forward, just generally. But with Donovan Mitchell and his status, whatever it is, certainly not great. And then just the inability to two things. Number one, the way they've lost game 2, and then frankly the way they lost the last game. I mean, two different fashions completely, but both emotionally crushing defeats. Right? They have suffered 2 of those now in 4 games. I think it's a lot, and I think subconsciously, psychologically, I think that could play tricks with you. And again, it may not be so overt, but I do wonder if just sort of subconsciously there will be some of that.
Do you believe? Okay, Stephen, we'll put it this way: do you think they win tonight? Talking about Indiana,
I think they have the mojo at this point. I think they win. I mean, look, I'm not discounting the Cavs. They're good. They're legitimately good. But this is proving to be a terrible matchup, and I don't quite understand why, but this has been a terrible matchup for them, and I don't see a way that I don't even know what it would take for them to win 3 straight. I don't see a scenario where that could happen. Not because the Pacers are so amazing; they are really good, clearly, but for whatever reason, this is just not the matchup for the Cavs, and I don't understand it. And the injuries have played a role certainly, but that's not the reason for the way this thing has been lopsided, in my opinion.
Yeah, listen, I think Cleveland's outstanding. And you know what's interesting to me about them, Stephen, is until Game 4, Strus got a little bit floppy, and clearly the DeAndre Hunter situation, although I think we realize now that, Ben Matherin's not exactly, Ben Matherin does not have an odd-looking shot because he's got to put the ball through his halo, right? I mean, let's be real here. But having said that, Cleveland really they don't have a lot of unlikable personalities. I mean, they see the problem is they also and I think I think the world of Donovan Mitchell, truth be told. I think he is
he's great.
I like his approach, but with all of that said, I just can't get a read on their psyche, if that makes sense. They would be very good poker players.
Yeah. It is interesting. I think what is also their identity? I mean, I don't know. I mean, they play a lot of guys. They can be physical. They have good size. I think the Pacers actually have a little, and maybe this isn't your question, but just my observation. The Pacers kind of have a more clear identity. I think a clearer identity. of the two teams, and it's because we know what they are and who they are and what they want to do, right? They're a team that they like to have fun. They like to push the ball. They're going to play fast. They love pace, and they're going to defend just enough to get the job done. And we know what they are, and they're also deep. I think that's their other, sort of calling card. So I know exactly what they are, and I think you know exactly what you're dealing with when you play the Pacers. I don't know. That seems less clear to me. I obviously know the Pacers better, so maybe I'm the wrong person to ask, but they certainly are the team that is representing or living up to their identity in this series, much more so than the Cavs.
Do you feel like after going through what we just went through with the Colts for the rookie minicamp, I was going to say rookie orientation. That's the wrong way of saying it. But having said that, did you learn, speaking of knowing the Pacers, do you know any more about the Colts now than you did a week ago? Was there anything you learned or anybody that you saw and you said, you know what, that's an interesting dynamic, or one that I guess the better question would be this. Was there a position area that you felt like Chris Ballard did not address, but once you looked at the roster of undrafted free agents and the potential thereof, that you thought to yourself, maybe he did address it more than I gave him credit?
No, I wouldn't say that, actually. I don't think I saw that. I would say this. I can't remember if we had this conversation last week, but they didn't do anything at linebacker, right? And that was troubling to me initially. The way I've heard Lou Anarumo talk about it, and getting a deeper understanding from just hearing from various people in the organization, I don't think they're worried about it. I mean, I don't think you can completely ignore it necessarily. I don't agree with that, but they're not obsessing over it. They have one linebacker who has started, I believe this is true, has made more than 2 career starts, and that is Zaire Franklin, who is going to be out for a little bit, by the way. So this whole offseason.
Yeah, did he have a surgery?
Yeah, so he had a little bothersome issue in his ankle, and they just decided to do a little bit of a cleanup there. So it is a surgical thing, yeah. So he will, they'll sit him the rest of the OTAs, and he'll be ready to go in training camp is the expectation. So I don't worry about that unless there's some, unless he falls short in terms of the timeline or something. Veteran guy, I mean, he'll be fine. But I think if you look at that position, there's only one guy that started more than 2 games in his career, and it's him who's going to be on the sideline. So that to me was troubling. But what I've learned so far, or it has been reinforced to me, is they are not going to play a lot of traditional linebacker defense. It's going to be, the lineup is going to be no more than 2 linebackers out there. They'll pretty much never really play a base defense with 3 linebackers, from what the impression that I'm getting. And in many cases, they may have 1 linebacker out there. So as a dime package, so they're going to be a lot different and look a lot different and use those guys a lot differently.
Okay, I don't want this to be the case, but is there the possibility that now in a new defensive scheme under Anarumo, that we learn that Zaire Franklin's tackle totals and production were scheme-based, and that he doesn't have flexibility of range of linebacker like other players may at that position?
Well, I would say we know that. I think we do know that. I would say this.
Okay.
I think if Lou Anarumo.
So you think it's a position? Is it a position they could upgrade? I mean, quite, frankly.
No. What I mean is this. Let me put it this way. Let me say it this way. What I mean is, his game is he has a very specific kind of game, and his game is he's a see ball, get ball kind of guy, which is fine, right? I mean, Darius Leonard in many ways was that way, but he's
right.
also just an old school kind of thumper, physical guy, great against the run. I think he serves an important purpose, and you want that tone setter in the middle of your defense. What you don't want is to ask him to go cover like Sam Laporta in coverage, right? The Lions tight end who runs like a gazelle, right? You don't want that, because that's not his game, and he is not that kind of linebacker. That does not mean you don't have value. It just means that your coaching staff has to acknowledge that and bake that into the details when they're game planning. I think they're going to do that. And one of the things that Zaire has said is that I really like their plans for putting us in position to individually succeed. Okay, and that is very important. And that to me says the individual player success is just as important as the scheme. Players, not plays. I have been a big proponent of that. I think sometimes Shane Steichen falls into that. I think that is how you got to govern yourself in the NFL. Players, not plays, and do what your players do best.
You know, by the way, I've watched that National Geographic channel from time to time. Just so you know, Stephen, running like a gazelle not always ends out in the win. It wins out in the end, right?
You mean sometimes
just so you know.
the lion catches them, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, the cheetah's also pretty fast, right? Like some. Yeah,
True.
The Jaguars live in the safari? Jaguars don't, right? They're only in Florida, right? Is that right?
No, those are Panthers. Jaguars
Panthers and Jaguars
jungle.
the same thing? Aren't Panthers just Jaguars but black? You know, I should ask Brendan King this because we're approaching the time of year where I think he's a Florida Panthers fan. If they're still alive in the NHL playoffs, he might know the answer to this.
But there's also Black Panthers, though. So, to really throw you for a loop.
Well, what's the difference between a Black Panther and a regular Panther? I thought all Panthers are black. I thought all Panthers are Jaguars, but not all Jaguars are Panthers. If they're black, then they're a Panther, and then if they're a Black Panther, I don't know what that means. If they're a Black Panther, they're in Forrest Gump, right?
You got to understand something about me, okay? I majored in journalism because it is, in part, okay, I love journalism, but in part
because it's not science.
It was the major that required the least amount of math and science, okay?
Right, of course.
They let me out of there with like 2 math classes, okay? I swear to God. I don't know how that worked, and I don't know. My advisor must have done some wonders.
You know what always
there,
bothered me? I'll tell you what bothered me. Stephen, what bothered me when I was at Indiana was the fact that now this is not still the case, but when I was a freshman, well, I take that back. When I would have been technically a sophomore, when I enrolled at Indiana and transferred into Indiana, as an English major, you had to have 2 math courses to graduate. But as a math major, you only had to have 1 English course. Now, which is more important, to be able to speak the language or to be able to use an abacus? Like, you know what I mean? It always bothered me.
That doesn't make a lot of sense, but
yeah, I never found it fair. All right, Stephen Holder, our guest. Stephen, what's upcoming in terms of the coverage? Both from now, are you done with your NBA responsibilities?
I think so. Although, let's see where this goes. I mean, maybe all hands on deck here the way this is going. So I don't know what's on tap for me coming up. But we have an entire NBA staff ultimately, and so they'll call me if they need me. Believe me, I'm up for it. NFL wise, quiet this week. So pretty quiet from the Colts this week. There won't be any availability, but next week we'll get going again. And we're about, I think a couple weeks out. Obviously the schedule coming out, but we're a couple weeks out, I think, from getting some on-field action here that we'll get to see. So, stay tuned and be patient. We'll get to that here pretty soon. And media will get to actually see in person and pass that along.
Listen, if the Pacers go to the finals, they're going to pick you up, right?
I guess.
If the NBA finals are in Indianapolis, they're absolutely going to use a guy that works for ESPN.com and is in Indianapolis, right? Because then it becomes a huge story.
We send a gazillion people to the finals anyway, right? ESPN. I mean, it's broadcast by Disney and all that. So, I mean, they'll have plenty of help, believe me. But I will definitely volunteer. Let's put it that way. I will absolutely make that call.
Stephen, they could go, man. I mean, I'm not kidding you.
They can go. They absolutely can.
New York is outstanding. Don't get me wrong, and I think the world of Karl Anthony Towns and Jalen Brunson both. But the depth of Indiana, it feels like they got a shot, right?
Listen, if they control the pace and dictate the pace, I'm going to say if, because we're not there yet, right? If they meet New York in the conference finals and the Pacers are able to consistently dictate the pace, I don't think the Knicks can play that pace. That's my take on it. We'll see.
The Pacers have a strategy against it. Now, there's still a game to be played, and I am very realistic of that. I mean, you still have to land the knockout against Cleveland, and that's the hardest punch to land. I realize that.
Yes.
But if they were to face New York, people are going to get tired of hearing me say this. There is a secret ingredient that Indiana's going to use. I will guarantee you what the strategy is going to be against New York. And Stephen, you're going to have to turn on your radio because I'm going to tell everybody what it is coming up just about 5 minutes from now. Stephen Holder, ESPN.com. Appreciate it as always, all right?
All right, see you.
And Bobby Unser says, thank you, literally, for joining the show. All right, I'll tell you what it is about Karl Anthony Towns next. So tonight, the Cleveland Cavaliers will be feeling the pressure as to whether or not their season will be put on ice, baby. See what I did there, Eddie? Come on now.
That was okay, but you're still
Dominic. Come on, man. Come on.
No, that was good, but you're still forgetting it's the
Cavaliers,
not the Cavaliers.
That's right. My apologies, Eddie. Your thoughts? What do you think happens tonight?
I don't know. I go back and forth all the time because what you bring up is a good point about having to, the mindset of Cleveland. They just lost by 40, or they were down 41 at halftime. You lose by 20 at Indy just 2 nights ago, and if they're going to want to travel back and handle all that, so Mitchell obviously not 100% either.
Yeah, I don't think that they throw it, right? But
right.
You do wonder that if it gets to that point where you just got to dig down deep, do you just not like Steven said, subconsciously just go, man, come on,
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they are all human beings, and it's just the odds of us winning 3 straight are very slim. And if you're Cleveland, I mean, you got to use the crowd tonight to your advantage, and you got to feed off of their energy, and hopefully that you can just win tonight, one at a time, is the old cliche. And then if you're Indiana, you just can't. You have to deplete the crowd early. You've got to go out there. You got to get off to a strong start like you did on Sunday night in Indy. That way the crowd's not into it, and you're not behind the 8 ball like you have been for the previous 2 games in Cleveland.
Do you know one of the things, Eddie, that my mind wanders to when I'm sitting here at the Speedway?
Missing me and missing out on this fabulous cluster truck lunch that I am about to consume next break.
Oh, what did you get from the cluster truck lunch?
I got the Kevin Bowen burger today and a side of the Sidewinder fries. I had the fries last break, and I'm going to dive into this burger next commercial break.
I would not have blamed you at all if you'd have gone with the same barbecue chicken strips that you got last week.
I know.
Those were spectacular.
Yes, they were fantastic.
Here's what I think, and look, we have made it now in a race itself when they display crossed furled flags, or unfurled flags, I should say. That means that you are halfway through the race. We have reached that point in today's show, and I'm very proud of myself. It's a sign of my maturity that I have waited this long before I've mentioned this. But it just hit me. The epiphany just hit me.
Really? It did just now?
Yes. I'm sitting inside the media center at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. For those that are unfamiliar, the media center sits directly north of the pagoda. So that means that it is approximately 2/3 of the way down the straightaway. Now, the straightaways here are 5/8 of a mile long. The short chutes are all 3/4 of a mile. So I'm looking at the south short chute, meaning I'm looking at the grandstands that are at the exit of turn number 1 and circle all the way through. I can see them from my vantage point all the way through turn number 2. Okay?
Okay.
So I'm looking at 3/4 of a mile of grandstands. They are, and if I had to guess, Brendan, how many rows are in that grandstand directly across from us in that vista, the southeast vista? Actually, that is the south vista. What would you guess? That's got to be 60 rows, right? Something like that? No, not that high, because you go obviously A through Z, and then probably, so let's say, okay, 45. 45 rows, okay? So 45 rows, and it is 3/4 of a mile across for 45 rows all the way across. And these were not designed for Dom DeLuise, right? I mean, the seats were designed more for, more diminutive individuals. And yet, I'm looking at 5/8 of a mile of a double-decker, so another 90 rows for 5/8 of a mile, and I'm looking at to my right, and they're all empty, right? And I'm looking at this all the way around. Nick Yeoman knows exactly what I'm about to say. Nick, when I'm looking at all of these seats, okay, and I'm looking at turn 1 where you're going to be for the Speedway, and I'm looking at all of these seats all the way around, what do you think I'm thinking to myself, Nick? How much? I'm thinking to myself, right there, I'm looking at an empty seat for every person that was in attendance for round 6 of the NFL draft in Green Bay, Wisconsin. That's unbelievable to me. That's unbelievable. That's amazing to think that, the amount of people that were in the parking lot of Lambeau Field and then the auxiliary building of it, if you piled them in, would still barely fit inside of this 2.5-mile oval, 45 rows deep, shoulder to shoulder. Now, Eddie, are you proud of me that I made it this far into the show today before I pointed that out?
Yeah, I'm surprised it took an hour and 36 minutes for you to get that far to mention something about IMS, the attendance, and the NFL draft all in one.
But again, I simply go back to this, and I mean it, listen. I know that harboring on things is a weakness of mine. I get that. I know it. I've been working hard on it. I go to counseling. However, having said all of that, I say it not to continue to bang the dead horse of the NFL draft inflated numbers, but rather to simply point out.
Isn't beating a dead horse and not banging a dead horse?
Well, I was going to say banging the gavel into a dead horse. How's that? So beating a dead horse. Thank you. Yes. But I say that only not as that, but rather when you're in here and it's empty, which it is today because, it's raining right now. I mean, yes, there are a lot of kids here and there are people walking around in the infield. But in terms of the stands, from my perspective, they are closed because, first off, there was a lightning strike earlier, and so then they asked people to vacate the stands. But not the case now. They're simply trying to dry the track. But I don't know that you realize the sheer magnitude of this place until you're sitting inside of it when it's empty. And it is massive. And that's why I am so jaded by that when they throw out that number, because I know how many seats are here, and then I know the number that they claim are at the NFL draft. And that's why I'm like, guys, you just can't grasp how many people that is. It's incredible. I'm sitting inside of right now, when it is full, the 51st largest city in the United States of America. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. It's pretty unbelievable. I want to get into further this situation with IU Indy basketball. And I know that, listen, the Pacers tonight they are a win away from going to the Eastern Conference Finals and presumably facing the New York Knicks. I get that. We are on the opening day of practice for the 109th running of the Indy 500, and Mother Nature has put a delay in that, but we hopefully and presumably are going to hear cars going around this oval before now in the end of the show. I totally get that. Jason Tatum last night had what appears to be pretty devastating injury. I've not heard the latest. Eddie, if there's new information, let me know on that, on Jason Tatum. It certainly looked like an Achilles, but I'm not a doctor. But, that seemed to be the overwhelming sentiment that people felt that was the issue. And that really changes the complexity of the Eastern Conference, not just this year, but beyond, truthfully, if that is the case. I know that that's going on. And I know that, in addition to that, you've got, like I talked about, New York. And, there's a lot going on in the world of sports. I get all that. But when you're talking about a program at IU Indy that had a local coach who's a likable guy. I like Paul Corsaro a great deal. I'm not in his practices. I don't know, but I like IU Indy as well. I like their athletic director a great deal. I like the support staff there. I've been to games there, took classes there for that matter. And, excuse me, I know
Bless
that
you.
they are getting, thank you. Thank you.
You okay? Did you choke on some saliva? Did you choke on some
I did.
lettuce?
I just literally swallowed the wrong pipe there.
Okay. You swallowed the wrong pipe? That's impressive.
It went down the wrong pipe. So at any rate, I know the footprint that is being laid for that program. And to now do an about-face at the head coaching position and kind of put yourself back to square one, to me is a fascinating storyline. And I want to get into that and what the challenge is going to be for the next coach at that program and how it ties into IU and Purdue. And we'll do that next. And then Scott Agnes joining us, 2 o'clock hour. Conor Daly going to be here as well, as you're listening from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Quarry and Company here, 93.5, 107.5 The Fan. I completely failed to get into the Karl Anthony Towns point I was going to make, which I will simply say is this. I think if the Pacers, what you're going to hear me say a lot of, is if the Pacers face New York, Karl Anthony Towns is an elite-level player, and he absolutely had his way with Indiana earlier this year at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. But they're going to go right at him. I think their thought process is that Towns is easy to get out of position and, on the floor, truth be told. And because of the amount that New York utilizes him and because of their lack of depth, I think Indiana would go right at him and immediately try to both wear him down and get him in foul trouble. And that will be what you will see. Instead of avoiding him and his rim protection, Indiana will challenge it. And they'll challenge it early and often. And between Siakam and Turner, they will try to get to the rim and get him both in foul trouble and in balance trouble, if you will. And I think that will absolutely be their game plan. By the way, I want to thank, since we are at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, Arnie Schreben's here from IndyCar, but he refuses to come on the air, which is odd. Typically, there's nobody that loves the camera more than Arnie, so I don't know what's going on with that in that aspect. He said he's a member of the company, but a low-level member of the company. I don't know what that means. But nonetheless, since we are at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway here, I want to thank Devin Duncan, Cameron Blankenship, and as well Nick Lopez, the engineers that put it together that allow us to kind of go remotely here in terms of a studio on location, because there's no better place to be in the month of May than at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, although I have always said this is a place that can be the most glorious place on earth, and then during rain it can be the most depressing place on earth because you're sitting there like, man, come on, because you look out and you so badly want to see cars out on the track, which I think we will see at some point today, but we are still under a weather delay and have not seen cars just yet. The big news this morning locally, yes, of course, the Pacers Cavs like I talked about, but this situation with IU Indy, here to me is what is fascinating about this situation. IU Indy is obviously, a rebrand of IUPUI. They have made the NCAA tournament under Ron Hunter. And Ron Hunter really deserves a lot of credit for lifting that program and getting it into, a place where it became kind of nationally known by that tournament run and truthfully by his clearly his colorful and charismatic behavior and personality. He's a great guy. Bob Lovell, who we all know at this radio station, had done a great job of coaching that program for years. And then Hunter, obviously, once they moved into Division I and got into the tournament, etc. And so having said all of that, the situation that they're in now with the rebrand as IU Indy, they're moving away from, obviously, playing at the Jungle and eventually moving into a new arena that is going to be, for those that are unfamiliar with the placement of it, if you remember the old tennis center and the RCA tennis championships, before that the clay courts, where they also had in the summer of '84 a series of concerts, including Hall & Oates and Billy Idol that played there. That location is almost exactly where the new arena is going to be. And when you're talking about building an arena and you get the legislation and the money to be able to do that, and then you are rebranding as IU Indy, the basketball program is a critical element for the branding of your school. And so when they had a search for a coach and they went with Paul Corsaro, it seemed like a very good fit because he had success at the University of Indianapolis. He's a local guy from Roncalli, a young guy, very likable. We've had him on the show. I don't know him on the personal level like Jimmy and like Eddie, like you do, because of your guys' connection with the school and doing games there. But nonetheless, certainly a likable guy. And I went to a couple of their games this year and watched him and thought that his teams looked very disciplined. And it's difficult when you take over a program late and then you are, you're in your first year and in the transfer era and et cetera. And they had some transfers in, they had some transfers out, what have you. When recently I just had a conversation about IU Indy basketball and the curveball or the dynamic in the NIL era of what that means for that program. And it was my assumption that it could be actually advantageous NIL because what you can do is what we've talked about, for example, with Pat Knight at Marion, which is okay, you can take a program and you can say, look, if you come here and you play for me and you play well, I might not have a lot of NIL money, but what I can do is get you in position then to get to a school that will get NIL money. And if you are able to orchestrate and know that you are basically working as a stepping stone program and that maybe you only get guys for a 2-year window, then you know what you're getting into a little bit and you can build your program that way. And I was under the assumption that's how IU Indy would be their best avenue. And when I talked to somebody very high up within that program, it was not Paul Casaro, mind you, but recently, and they said, actually, it's a huge disadvantage for us because of our collectives. And we don't have the NIL collective that even schools within our own league, like an Oakland or a Robert Morris, and in particular schools that have Division I sports in other sports that can generate money then that can be used also in their basketball collective. And so, not that IU Indy does it, but they don't have football, they don't have, et cetera. What I probably didn't totally latch onto is that a lot of the NIL money that IU Indy was working with was money that privately was, I believe, connected to or collected by Paul Casaro in his connections. So when somebody was saying to me, we have some challenges here within our NIL collectives, I didn't connect the dots that perhaps what they were saying was because we are about to part ways with one of those who is making the collective that we have possible. Because Casaro is connected to a lot of that NIL. And in addition to that, when 6 different players or the families of 6 players went to IU Indy's athletic department and said that they had questions about the coaching methods and an excess of the way that Paul Casaro was handling players, be it physical or emotionally speaking. The university then did an investigation, and there were 4 different players, not families of, but 4 specific players who themselves, by firsthand account, made allegations. IU Indy investigated those allegations, and after the investigation, publicly determined and stated that what they uncovered, while not getting into specifics of it, were not within the spirit of the way IU Indy wants their athletic department or programs thereof run, and as a result, they have made that change. What is interesting now is finding a coach that can navigate the waters, not just of dealing with everything in terms of transfers and the instability of program, but also the NIL collectives. Going to be interesting to see what happens. Scott Agnes joins us other side. Summer of '69 was a good one for Mario Andretti at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He, of course, the winner that year. We shall see who it is in installment number 109. Waiting for practice to get underway for that event that will be taking place tentatively 2 weeks from Sunday. I say that only because you never know with Mother Nature, but knock on wood, everything will be A-OK. As of today, no cars yet on track. That's because there's been, I wouldn't say it's a rain, more just like a persistent mist that has taken over the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But it seems to have stopped now. The dryers, I don't hear any dryers out, but the safety vehicles are still out trying to get any excess moisture up, and then perhaps we will see, in fact, practice getting underway. Keep in mind there is still a veteran refresher course that has to take place for Tony Kanaan at some point. That's because he could fill in for Kyle Larson in the event that Larson is not able to run the Indy 500. Kanaan is the driver that would do so, and therefore he would have to undergo the mandatory refresher course. Being told that pit lane is now open. Cars are getting rolled out, and sometime in the next 19 minutes, it is estimated that we may hear the engines here on the 2.5-mile oval. Thank you for that information. Joining us now on the program with Pacers and Cavs tonight in game number 5 in Cleveland, Scott Agnes is here from Fieldhouse Files, and Scott actually sounds like he might be on one of the dryers out there at the Speedway. Scott, we find you where currently?
Not quite there. I'm up in Chicago. It's the NBA Draft Combine, so be here the rest of the week covering all of that, looking ahead to the draft coming up, and what a wild turn of events last night, right?
Yeah, so let's begin with that. This clearly was rigged, right? Because Cooper Flagg is, everybody knows, is going to be number 1. Dallas sends Luka Doncic to Los Angeles to partner up with LeBron. Their general manager is basically, you can't go anywhere in Texas without people up in arms about it. And they get rewarded because Adam Silver facilitated for all of that with the sweepstakes for Cooper Flagg. I've got that all right, correct?
Except for the last part, right? So I've been in that draft drawing room where it's closed, they take your phones, all of that. And you basically, it's like a 12-minute process, Jake, but then you sit around for an hour because they got to produce the TV segment and draw it out right for an hour program. And so I can't imagine what it was like last night after their one representative for Dallas is just celebrate. You want to call anybody and everybody to celebrate. There's just, I think it's a fun discussion and everything, but there's just no way I could imagine it's rigged because you visually see everything. There's people, representatives from Ernst & Young that are handling all this, but it is definitely remarkable how, individuals like LeBron leave Cleveland gets the number 1 pick. New Orleans gets that number 1 pick, and now after Dallas's self-imposed, catastrophe earlier this year, now they kind of get fresh life here going into the offseason.
Okay, explain this to me. My understanding is, and you tell me if I'm wrong, that the way they do this now is they have basically like a lottery ping pong ball system with different, like if you are the worst team, you have more ping pong balls in there, et cetera, et cetera. And that then the ping pong ball pops up, and that's how it's determined. Is that correct? I mean, you witnessed it. Is that how it works?
It's not like there's it's combinations. So there's 4 balls drawn, and then so if it's 1, 2, there's a certain order, right? It has to go at. So you have to get 4 different lottery balls in order to get it. It's not like it draws a lottery ball and that's Pacers. It's a 4-digit combination that then is assigned to a specific team.
Interesting. Okay. Because you have to admit, and do I really think it's rigged? I don't. But it's been very coincidental over the years. It's been very coincidental. Derrick Rose is a native of Chicago, and they happen to get the number 1 pick. San Antonio has experience with, Tim Duncan and David Robinson, and then they get Wembanyama. The thing you mentioned about Cleveland. There are a lot of tie-ins
right.
that you can look at towards it. Now, I will say this, Scott. I probably asked you this before, but I'll ask you again. One of my favorite trivia questions of all time. Cooper Flagg will become the first Caucasian American drafted number 1 overall in the NBA draft since who?
I use Kim Benson.
That is correct, in 1977. Now, my other favorite trivia question. This is a good one, too. I probably asked you this on the air because it's one of my favorite trivia questions. You are at the NBA Scouting Combine. The last player selected number 1 overall that was a 4-year collegian is who?
That one, I do not know that one. It's been a while.
I mean, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot because no one would know. That's why it's a great trivia question, because it's such an easy, you know what I mean? Because the guy was a good player. I'll tell you this, the guy was a very good player. He was a solid pro and had a nice career, but not, was not a franchise-changing player, although he did play on very good teams. Coming out of college, he had suffered a broken leg when many people thought his team was destined to make a Final Four run, but he broke his leg late in the year, and his nickname is that of a discount shopping place that's no longer around. Any guesses?
Well, when you said the broken leg, I was thinking back to Indy with the Ware guy from Louisville, but there was no way it's him.
Before that, not long before that.
Yeah, right.
2000. That's why it's a great trivia question. I mean, I'm not trying to make you look bad. Correct. And you ask anybody that. Correct. It was 2000. Kenyon Martin to the Nets. You could go to a Nets game and ask people that trivia question, and they would have to be run the same number of fans because it's just.
So it's been 25
nice career, right?
years.
It'll never happen again. It'll never happen again, right? Theoretically.
And so that's one of the most interesting things, I think, too, about the combine and the lottery and all of that, right? Is so the NIL has significantly changed things as well. I think there was like a sixth of the number of players that declared for the draft than had in previous years just because of those opportunities. And then you look back at college basketball, you certainly have the guys at the top like a Cooper Flag, Jake, but then it was all those experienced 4-year and 5-year players that aren't pro-worthy or they would have already gone, but it was those individuals helping teams like Houston all the way to the Final Four.
All right, Scott, first off, let's begin with this. Tonight, Pacers-Cavs, Game 5. If you had to guess, we've seen Cleveland went to that zone again. Indiana finally found the combination on how to beat it. I thought they were obviously effective with that. But the adjustments they made in terms of their offensive aggressiveness, getting Siakam established early, moving the ball around, and just being offensively aggressive with that for the Pacers. What changes does Cleveland make tonight? What adjustments does Cleveland make tonight to try to catch Indiana off guard?
Yeah, I wonder if the trouble is going small kind of plays against their strengths. But I wondered if they might try to do something like that. Do you move Ty Jerome to the bench and go with a different guy, because Jerome has clearly not had a very good productive season whatsoever there. I think maybe the Cavs found a little something in Darius Garland in that third quarter. I thought it was notable that it was a 40-point game, and Garland played that entire third quarter. Didn't play in the fourth, but maybe got some confidence and some rhythm there. But I just wonder if they'll try a little bit different combinations and maybe try a little smaller lineup with that. Because, I mean, you look back at the last game, Jake, their two bigs combined for just 20 points, 11 rebounds. That should be one of their stat lines. Actually, it's worse than that. I'm looking at it now. 12.7 rebounds. I'm sorry. And so the challenge is that two big lineup just doesn't work, nor is it nearly as effective against the Pacers because of how quickly they want to play, how up and down, and how the Pacers play that 5 out. Miles Turner's one of the most valuable players in this series because of all that.
When you look, Scott Agnes is our guest from Fieldhouse Files. Scott, from the Indiana standpoint, I think one of the things that's been great about this series is they've gotten contribution really from everybody. Jarris Walker would be the one guy maybe that his game has dipped a little bit in the postseason versus where he was in the regular season, but they've gotten good play at different points from about everyone. Does Rick Carlisle continue, obviously I would assume, to stay with the same rotations? In other words, do you make Cleveland adjust to you, or does Indiana come back with some sort of tweak or adjustment in the way they rotate things?
In terms of personnel, no, I think it'll be the exact same. Why mess with it, right? It's got them 3 games to this point. They'll be obviously working Matherin back in the rotation after he played just over a minute the other game. But outside of that, personnel, I'm not changing anything. I'm not. I think you figured it out last game, and you just want to repeat of what happened in the last one.
Scott Agnes, our guest, Fieldhouse Files. Scott, what exactly goes on at the draft scouting? Because the NBA draft seems different than the NFL draft, and the fact that there seems to usually be a pretty good idea of what the top 15 picks are, and there are so many places you can see guys play outside of the scheme of just wherever they're playing for their college, etc. Who all's at where you are in terms of the talent that's concerned, and what all goes into it?
Yeah, so it's a week-long thing. There's now just 1 day of interviews with the players. That's coming up tomorrow. Today is mostly the strength, agility, measurable type testing, maybe some shooting drills as well. I just saw Liam McNeely, who obviously committed to IU and then went to UConn. He was out there shooting around, and what was notable too is they try to involve younger or lesser staff that are trying to rise up, right? And for example, since the Pacers staff is busy, they've had their strength coach and trainers involved previously. The Noblesville Boom head coach Tom Hankins is out there working around with some of them. But today's strength, the agility, shooting, the other big thing that goes on throughout the week is teams submit a list of players in which they want to interview. I think they get about 15 minutes, maybe up to a half an hour with each of them, but not all of their lists, so they try to be selective. So that's a big part of it, just like the NFL scouting combine. And then the other big change here in the last couple of years is anyone that partakes is required to do the measurable testing. They aren't required to play in the scrimmage, and that's certainly an area where maybe fringe first-round picks or second-round guys absolutely want to participate in. The most perfect example to mention here is Andrew Nembhard. He really rose up the Pacers' opinion of him because of what he did in this combine. He didn't play the first day due to injury, toughed it out, starred in that second day, and then the Pacers brought him to town and liked everything they saw with him. So a combination of everything throughout this week.
I thought I saw, Scott Agnes, our guest, I thought I read, and you can fill in the blanks on what I skimmed over and didn't get too in-depth on, that Mackenzie Mbako, for example, of Indiana, had gone through a G League tryout or period that then facilitated for him to get an opportunity. Is it at the Combine where you are, where he was also invited?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. Over this past weekend, they have what they call the G League Ignite Elite Camp, which is the group that didn't quite make it to the Combine that presumably is there to work out for those that may be more geared towards the G League. And then ultimately from that group, 5 of them then received invitations, and that's a direct correlation from feedback that the NBA received from its NBA teams. And among that group, there's 3 names on it the audience would be familiar with. One is Andrew Nembhard's brother, Ryan Nembhard, and then out of Gonzaga, obviously, and then Tamar Bates and Mackenzie Mbako. So they are able to participate in the rest of this week because they shined this past weekend.
Gotcha. Okay. And then, Liam McNeely is one that I found interesting because I saw that he, I saw him projected into the mid-20s draft-wise, and I know he got hurt this year. And why are we talking about him? Well, he originally had committed to Indiana. He is one that I thought was actually going to work his way maybe into the lottery discussion. Maybe he's got some work to do there because of the fact that he was injured over the course of the year. Scott Agnes, our guest. All right, Scott, before we let you go and get back to the action there, I want to get back to this game tonight. I've said it 100 times. This is the hardest one to get. If in a 7-game series, the 4th win is the hardest to get. You will be looking for what early in the game that will tell you that things are going to go Indiana's way or Cleveland's way?
I think first I'll go back to what we always talk about. You get Miles involved early, things tend to happen good for the Pacers. You think back to last game, it was a Siakam steal and a Halliburton dunk, and those two needed to do more. You need more from your stars. So I think it don't have to get off to a great start, but they can't, Jake, fall down 10, 15-point deficit there in the first quarter. So that's among the biggest things I'll be looking for. And by the way, I hate this phrase, but we can mention it today. Tonight's a must-win for the Cavaliers, by the way.
Yeah, it is definitely that. And Scott, people probably that have been listening to the whole show today are tired of hearing me say this, but I'm curious your thought on it. I was talking to somebody yesterday that said, look, the one thing you just never know about is the dynamic of how a team responds if they know that by winning, then they've got to get on an airplane. They've got to go to a place where they just got humiliated as a number 1 seed. And if they win that, then they got to come back and go through it all again. And if Indiana is able to hang around in a close game, that psychologically that could take a toll on Cleveland. that is something that's convenient for a sportscaster on the radio to say, but not reality in the NBA, or that is a possibility with today's NBA players of being something Cleveland could have to contend with?
Yeah, this is a game where the Pacers want to leave no doubt once again. I think they want to get a stranglehold there in that first half and then continue to wear them down. They continue picking up full court and realize not only does the Cavaliers have several injuries, guys are not at full strength, but you can win the endurance battle. That's how this team was built. And so I think they'll look to continue to do that. And I'll be curious how Mathurin responds. Coming off, I didn't think it warranted an ejection, but coming off that experience, he's going to be the freshest player of anyone and the most motivated, I think, to close out.
Scott, lastly, obviously busy time because you got the Speedway and the Pacers. For you, a busy time because Pacers and now the Fever getting ready to get underway as well.
For sure. And so what this week is about is preparing for opening night coming up Saturday afternoon. There is featured game on ABC again. ESPN ABC sending their top WNBA crew, but they took the last couple of days off after wrapping up a 3-0 preseason. And then we look forward to Saturday. The two injuries, really actually three now that I think about to note. Sophie Cunningham sprained an ankle over the weekend. She seems to be doing okay based on what Stephanie White had to say after the game, but we'll find out a little bit later on after they've practiced for a couple days. We're monitoring Caitlin Clark in that left quad area that's bothered her throughout camp. And then we haven't seen Damaris Dantas, a backup big for them, throughout training camp as well. So that's another player to keep an eye on. And they need to cut one player over the next 48 hours.
Not going to be Caitlin Clark, right?
I can confirm that, yes.
Okay, so Caitlin Clark's injury, though, this is something that is of concern or just something that is precautionary, and if it was like in the middle of the season would not be an issue?
I think it's concern for sure. It's to the point where I think you're going to watch her minutes a little bit, and it's going to be something that you see her working through. So before the game in Iowa, she had a heating pad on it and was really trying to warm that up. Anytime she was on the bench, she had the heating pad. Then she went in the tunnel to ride the bike to keep it loose, to keep it warm. So I would assume this is something she'll be dealing with for at least a couple of weeks, and it's something we'll be monitoring, but it's nothing that I would expect her to miss, say, opening night for.
All right, Scott, we'll let you get back to work there. How many courts are running right now, by the way, at the big scouting combine?
There's one main court, and then there's kind of the end zone area where there's a couple baskets where guys can warm up and get loose. And we're at Wintrust Arena, by the way, to be clear, on DePaul, where the Chicago Sky play.
And so far the best player has been who?
It's hard to judge just now. I just got here an hour ago, and it's just all testing out on the court right now.
Mackenzie Mbako.
We'll
just say Mackenzie Mbako, please. We need you to say Mackenzie Mbako. He's been the best player there. There you go. Best player there. All right, appreciate it, Scott.
All right, thanks, Jake.
All right, Scott Agnes joining us from up in Chicago at the NBA Scouting Combine. All right, the sun is finally out. It's taken forever. It is weird. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway is its own biosphere. I mean, you could be here and it looks glorious, and then you talk to somebody that's literally at Ben Davis High School, and they're like, no, it's a monsoon here. And you're like, what are you talking about? It looks like the Bahamas outside. Or vice versa. It literally is its own. It's the weirdest thing ever. But it has been a long wait today. Tony Conor was supposed to go out and do his refresher course. It is now listed as 10 a.m. tomorrow when they will do the refresher practice. So what that means is that Conor will have to go out and, yes, the best of the best go out and turn laps. And they do so under the watchful eye of IndyCar officials who then assess and evaluate at different speed increments that, yes, in fact, you still know what you're doing and you are reacclimated to this oval. And that will take place at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, and then practice will begin tomorrow afternoon. I believe noon again tomorrow. Noon until 6 is practice tomorrow, because you wonder sometimes. I have not seen if they have changed the schedule above and beyond just that. I think that 10 a.m. is a new window, but it does change when you get lost track time, and you did have some lost track time today, but they're going to get a chance still to turn laps. Now, do you have the breaking news center by chance, Eddie? This just in, but it doesn't take necessarily a road scholar to figure this out. Conor Daly was set to join us at 2:45 today, but that obviously now is not going to be possible because at 2:45 he's going to be in the car and turning laps here here at IMS because they are set to get underway. They had said 2:20. My clock shows that it is currently 2:20, but as of right now, don't hear any cars out there. But the sun is out, and it looks like it's going to be imminent that we're going to see some laps being turned after a long wait. And I'm telling you, I've actually wondered which is more cumulative. The number of hours that I have sat in Indianapolis waiting out a rain delay or the numbers that I've actually seen like an action of races. If this will be the 40th time that I've been to a race here, and if on average the race is, let's say, an average of, we'll say 3 hours, so that's 1,200 hours. I've probably, over the last 40 years, spent more than 1,200 hours sitting and waiting out rain delays.
It took you an hour and 36 to make mention of the IMS attendance and the NFL draft attendance.
Thank you for mentioning that, Eddie.
It took you 2 hours and 20 minutes to give the YouTube chat a view of your midsection.
Oh, yeah. That's right. I forgot we have I got to stand all the way back here. So I stand up. Listen, we've got the camera going on the YouTube chat, right? And I've got a little bit of my suntan glow going from the Grand Prix weekend. But when at 52, when you've worked for over a half century sculpting this kind of Michelangelo level sexiness, you want to make sure that people are able to see it in all its glory. And Eddie, you're appreciative of that, right? You can understand, you can relate, correct?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could come out here as well, and then we could put the camera on you. And again, it's basically the human eclipse of your head, right?
People would be blocked of your midsection then.
Listen, people that are watching on the YouTube chat, I sincerely appreciate it. And people that are listening to the show, I sincerely appreciate it today. And there is a lot going on because we've talked about it, the Tatum injury. What we need to find out, and I have not seen, Eddie, because we're here, you can tell me if you have seen any different. I have not, as of yet, heard, and I don't know that we will. I don't know that we will hear any official declaration on Donovan Mitchell and his status for tonight, other than I think at this point we can safely say he's a go, right?
My guess is that we will find out roughly around 5:30, and just before that, Rick Carlisle will meet the media. And right now the Pacers are healthy and nobody's on the injury report, so that's all good to go. But if I had to estimate, probably around 5:30, 5:45 is when you'll find out the official status of one Donovan Mitchell, and no update as of yet on Jason Tatum.
Well, they were awaiting an MRI on Tatum. I know a lot of times what happens when you have to do an MRI like that is you wait to let swelling go down. And then once the swelling goes down, that's when they can do the MRI. Now, I don't know. When everyone and their brother was assuming or prognosticating that it was an Achilles injury, and that's just because and nobody's hoping for that. Jason Tatum's a great player and presumably a good guy, but a fun player to watch. But after a while, when you see the same style of injury like that and you see what players go through when they experience it, then you can just tell to the eye, right? I mean, I think everybody knew when Damian Lillard went down with that Achilles, because you can see when it happens, and this is kind of grotesque, I realize, but you can see the reverberation a lot of times in the calf, and you can just tell right then. And then, everybody grabs for the back of the ankle. And I didn't see if Tatum necessarily grabbed at it, but the despair he was showing as he was being carted off, you could see his frustration and the reality of what he was facing sinking in at that point. And so for that reason, you think to yourself, man, that is a tough go for sure. And we talked about the fact that it may have implication on what Indiana does in the offseason. What do you mean by that? How could Jason Tatum's injury affect the Indiana Pacers and their strategy of roster build? I'll explain that when we return to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway on the first day of practice for the Indy 500. You're listening to Query & Company on The Fan. Jay Query here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Media Center specifically. Jake Query along with Brendan King just to my left. You hear his track updates, of course, keeping you abreast of what's taking place at the Speedway. And so far, what has taken place at the Speedway is the following. That concludes your rundown of what's taking place at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway because Mother Nature had things kind of wiped out until imminently here. They had said 2:20. We're now halfway through the 2 o'clock hour, and everybody is strapped in, but cars have yet to fire up. So we'll see when exactly the green flag gets waved and practice gets underway here. The first practice session for the month of May on the oval. Obviously, they've had open testing out here, but this is the first official practice session to get underway. Last night, Jason Tatum went down with injury for the Boston Celtics, and theoretically, very clearly, I think we can safely say, at the very least, his season is complete. What that means for next year, if in fact, and maybe this is unfair to speculate, but if Tatum were to have an injury that extends beyond this season and impacts Boston's year next year, then don't look now, but this Pacer team, their window's right now, but the window is just opening. The window's pretty open. There are teams that you can look at and say, look, they've got a real good chance, but you can see the window closing before your eyes. If you look at the Pacers, and the thing that I reference a lot, and it was fairly unprecedented, and that was, and I believe it was 3 years ago. My years do admittedly run together, but I had never before, as somebody who is a credentialed media member of the different sports teams and has been so, fortunate enough to be able to do so in various sports in various cities, I had never before seen, and it was really a cool deal, like this informal, just kind of finger food gathering of the Pacers brass and the media that was going to cover them. And that's what happened a couple of years ago. Right after the Pacers had acquired Tyrese Halliburton, they had drafted Andrew Nembhard, and Rick Carlisle was there. Kevin Pritchard was there. And I just recall them saying, listen, we wanted to get everybody out here because we appreciate your coverage of the team, but we wanted to let you know that we are politely requesting that you are clear to the fan base that we, are going to ask for patience because this is a complete rebuild, and we like the pieces we have. We like the fact that we think this Tyrese Halliburton's a really good player, and we really like – I remember them really – Kevin Pritchard telling me specifically, look, this Nembhard kid is really good. Like, you're going to be surprised how good this guy is. And they were very confident in it, but they knew that it was going to be a while and that they were going to – and I remember asking Rick Carlisle on the morning show when I was doing the morning show with Kevin and Mark and having Rick Carlisle on and saying, okay, so late in a game, if you have a situation where the combination on the floor may win you the game, but the combination on the bench that you want getting that experience may – and by the way, you can probably hear the sounds now, finally and officially – cars are out on the track at 2:34 here in the afternoon. Finally, practice underway at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Thank you. That's right. So pretty soon you might hear cars at speed. Right now they'll do a quick install lap. But at any rate, the Pacers were basically saying, look, we're going to start this from scratch. And I asked Carlisle that on the air. If you have a situation this year where you have a game that the combination on the floor might win you the game, but you have players on the bench that need experience in those moments but may not be as strong a lineup in that moment, which one do you go with? That's how, from the beginning, this all was. And I think, in fact, last year their success to a lot of people was considered to be premature, or advanced is probably a better way of saying it. And there was the thought process that, yeah, but Indiana's success is coming based on the fact that they had attrition in the East. Cleveland was banged up. Obviously, New York was banged up because Julius Randle was out. There was the thought process that the Pacers were there almost by default, and they made the most of the situation, and then they themselves got hurt. if Tatum is out next year and you look at the East, Detroit is clearly on the rise. No question. Orlando, you could make the argument, is on the rise. I didn't see where they're drafting this year. I mean, they were not in the lottery. Obviously, they made the playoffs. But, Paolo Banchero is a very good player and missed a lot of this year due to injury. And they've got, Wagner's a good player. They've got some pieces they need to add. But Orlando's, on the rise. And Cleveland, you would assume, and if Indiana is to eliminate Cleveland, what is Cleveland's window? They still have very good young players. Donovan Mitchell, though, has been in the league a long time for a guy that's never been in the conference finals. And you wonder, that's a big contract. Do they stick with that? My point, simply long-winded and circuitous here, is this, and that is that for the Pacers, the window is now, but the window, theoretically, if you look at the age of the players, is pretty long. So long as they have Miles Turner. Because all of the players on their roster, all of them, you can get away with Tyrese Halliburton not being a great wing defender as long as there is another piece that people have to get past in order to, at the rim, to prevent them from easily scoring. That piece is Miles Turner. You can get away with Pascal Siakam not being the best interior defender once somebody backs him down, so long as behind him he has a safety net that protects if somebody's able to get around him or get a shot over him. That safety net is Miles Turner. You can play at pace and wear people down with a rotation that goes 10, 11 deep and always have fresh players on the floor because you're playing at such a furious pace, so long as you have somebody who is rebounding and facilitating getting that pace through outlet passes, and also is trailing and can hit an open three if when you come down you don't immediately get a basket on the low block and transition quickly, and defenses have to still stay back for the one guy that's trailing that can hit an open three. That guy is Miles Turner. You can run an offense that, if you get forced into a half-court set, can still wear down the defensive side of the ball for your opponent because you have an unbelievable ball movement that runs around, and literally guys are making passes towards – it's almost like a motion offense. Guys are making a pass to a spot on the floor before they even know that somebody's going to rotate over to where that pass is because they know that just kind of the cycle of the rotation, the weave of where places people have to be, the ball is going to get there. You can do that in particular if you have somebody that then flashes to the high post and can recycle and reset things, hold the ball for a second until everybody's in position to get that cycle going again. That guy that does that is Miles Turner. And Miles Turner, who recently wrote on social media the column and then sent it out to everybody about how much he loves Indiana. There's a reason he was doing that, not only because he loves Indiana, but because he knows that he is in a contract year. And he kind of checkmated the front office because he's saying, look, I'm making it known right now I want to be here. So now there's no excuse. Buddy Hield's playing pretty well right now, and people ask me, why is Buddy Hield not still here? Because Buddy Hield was in a contract year and made it known to the Pacers front office that he was going to look elsewhere. So they had to get something for him. Turner has made it known that he loves it here. So for the front office, there's no excuse for anything other than for him to be here. And in that aspect of it, now all of a sudden kind of, Turner's the one that has a little bit of an upper hand here within that negotiation. Now, the Pacers want him to be here, don't get me wrong. And especially now, they have to know if this window is going to stay open, Miles Turner is the little wedge underneath the window that's keeping it open. And they have to start looking at, are they going to have to go into the luxury tax to pay him? Probably. And what that means is if they do that and if they maximize – and look, they've got Nembhard and Nesmith both on great contracts. So they know that they've got to start getting creative with money moving forward, looking at like 2, 3, 5 years down the road in terms of their budget. And, again, the guy that will be up during that time that is a very good player and a likable guy and hasn't done anything wrong but just seems to be the most expendable because of the way everybody else plays would be Ben Mathurin. And you wonder about what that means for Benedict Mathurin. JMV will hand it off to him about 15 minutes from now. We'll get you caught up on what's going on. Everybody's done their install laps here. Nobody up to speed just yet. If anybody does start clicking off a decent speed, we will certainly let you know about it when we come back here to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. You're listening to Query & Company, 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. Very, very cool. And it is a huge honor to have our next guest here to close out the show. And I hope I get this title correct because it merits being said correctly, but it also, intellectually speaking, is so far beyond my grasp that I probably won't say it correct. United States Magistrate Judge for the Southern District of Indiana is Mario Garcia, who also in 1991 was very capably and enthusiastically the Panther mascot at North Central High School in our graduating class. But most importantly, Mario, and do I say Your Honor? I mean, honestly, if I was to address you, other than Mario, my classmate, obviously within the proper title, would I refer to you as Your Honor?
That's what the title.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I want to be sure that I'm
yeah.
official. So, Your Honor, it is an honor to have you here because you did something and were part of something very special today, which I know you were very excited about, and I'm thrilled that you were, this is something that is not new to you, but there are now 34 new United States citizens thanks to a ceremony that you were a part of today. Scott McLaughlin, who is out on the race course right now, also was a part of that, but pretty cool honor for you today. Take me through it.
Yeah, it was really exciting. Doug Bowles and the Speedway have been very kind to host naturalization ceremony for the past 4 years, where we've welcomed usually 33 as a hat tip to the starting grid here at the Indianapolis 500. And this year, because there was a member from Team McLaren who, a crew member, was going through the process, we made the exception, had 34. And it was a fantastic ceremony. We got in before the rain, right in the Pagoda Plaza, in the shadow of the pagoda. And there were members of 23 different countries or so who were represented. And it culminated in a journey that they've spent several years trying to achieve.
I would think for you, Mario, and listen, I've known you a long time, so I know what people mean to you. I know what relationships mean to you. But to be able to see, I would imagine, just the joy, the pride, the culmination of work for those individuals, and to know that you're helping facilitate that final step for them has to be an emotional thing.
It really is, and to do it here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is really fantastic. The chief was kind enough to let me do this year's ceremony. Lifelong Indy fan, named after Mario Andretti, and to see those beaming faces introduced to a place that has so much history, and as Doug and I both mentioned today during the ceremony, Indianapolis Motor Speedway is the epitome of a melting pot of nations, right? We have nations represented in this field and every field from so many different countries, so many different winners from different countries that it's the perfect spot to host a naturalization ceremony for those who are becoming citizens. And it's as a judge, you don't get to have always really exciting days, but there aren't many more exciting than this.
And for you, this also had to be special because if I'm not mistaken, this is also the facility where you were sworn in your current position, correct?
I was not. That was an idea during COVID because I was
that's what it was.
A judge. And we were looking for outdoor spaces, frankly, and the Speedway, Mark, I think Miles at the time was kind enough to say, yeah, if we can help and do it, we will. But COVID, we had a
That's right. It was COVID
dip,
ended up,
and so
right.
I could do it in the courthouse, which was great.
Okay, so now with this is what numbered year that you have been able to oversee the naturalization process?
So I've been doing naturalization ceremonies for 4 years. This is the first year that I was able to do it at the Speedway.
Pretty cool, right?
Very cool.
Now you are a race fan as well, so do you have predictions for us here, or is it too early to know because practice is just getting underway?
Well, Jake, we don't like to show favoritism.
Okay, fair enough.
The scales are balanced.
You're named after one of the guys whose grandson's racing, Mario. I mean, come on.
To see Elio Castroneves get number 5 would be really cool. Really great. So many. Scott McLaughlin was so kind. I've got some Scott Dixon paraphernalia, memorabilia in my chamber. So Scott's always the Iceman, always a favorite here. So just want to see a great, fun, dry race this year.
I'll tell you what. It's Mario. I think all of us, when you grow up, and we were so fortunate. I mean, people probably get tired of hearing about my high school experiences on the radio, but we were so fortunate because we went to school with such an eclectic group of individuals, and there really wasn't anything in the real world that we weren't equipped for because we didn't know it at the time, right? But we went to school with, kids of so many different backgrounds, socioeconomically, theologically, all of it, right? And our class afforded us so many great things, but I can't tell you what an unbelievable thrill it is. I know I speak for all members of the class of 1991 to say that most of us are just plodding along in our own little lane of total irrelevancy and obscurity within impact on people. And then to know that there is somebody that is actually carrying the weight for our class that's making a difference in the world is greatly appreciated. And I know I speak for the other. I don't know how many were in our class, but I was ranked 482, so I hope it's a decent amount. But I speak for all of them in saying just how tremendously proud I am of what you've been able to do. It's truly remarkable.
Well, Jake, I'm humbled by it. I think I was 483.
That's right. That's where we met each other.
That's where we met each other. And there are so many of our classmates who are doing such amazing things who are in the public eye, like I have the fortune, and you have the fortune to be. And there aren't many people who have done more to move forward the image of Indianapolis than you on so many different media levels. So hats off to you as well, and the differences I know you make both publicly and quietly in people's lives. But I'm just, we're both products of public school, Washington Township, where we're both proud Panthers, and it's just we've got great stories. Everybody's got a story. We just have two of the many.
Lastly, and I appreciate that, Mario. Lastly, in terms of the naturalization process, this takes place how often in terms of the swearing in and how many times we see new citizens of this country?
Yeah, monthly at the district courthouse, and we'll swear in anywhere from 50 to 100 new citizens a month. And this is just one of many ceremonies that are taking place across the country. And some of them have taken place at unique places like the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. They've taken place at NBA stadiums, Major League Baseball stadiums, hockey rinks. So it's really bringing the ceremony to the public is a really important thing so that people can see what's happening.
Does the United States offer dual citizenship, or does anyone who become a U.S. citizen have to then relinquish their previous existing citizenship?
Yep. So you don't have to relinquish your citizenship. Mr. McLaughlin, I believe, is maintaining his Australian citizenship. So no, you can maintain multiple citizenships.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, Mario, listen, I appreciate it. You sent me the picture, and it was a fabulous ceremony.
Thanks for having me.
I knew you were doing it and mentioned it on the air when you had sent that to me, but it is a real thrill and an honor. And congratulations to all of those individuals as well, right?
Absolutely. Congratulations to them. They did the hard work.
Well, listen, but you were there to get them finalized across the line, which is the best thing, of course.
Yep.
All right, so we'll be back tomorrow. We will get you up to speed. Right now, the fastest on track, Scott Dixon, but they're just getting underway. Joseph Newgarden, Kyle Larson, Christian Lundgaard, Louis Foster, your top five right now. John is up next. Big game tonight in Cleveland. We'll talk about all of it and maybe be talking about the Pacers advancing to the Eastern Conference Finals remains to be seen, but we'll be talking about it nonetheless guaranteed tomorrow at noon. We thank you for listening to Query & Company.